I was supposed to marry the Duke, a man everyone called perfect. But his sister was the one running the whole show, and her grand plan had one fatal flaw. She never expected the sparks to fly with Femi Faye. Before a Duke and his sister crashed into my life, everything was beige. Not the comforting sort of beige either, not warm linen or gentle candlelight. No, this was the color of faded wallpaper, of dresses worn too many seasons in a row, of days that bled into one another, until you could no longer tell where one ended and the next began. Beige was my life's defining shade. Me name is Miss Loretta Linfield, eldest daughter of a gentleman whose ambitions had always far outpaced his finances. My father was a man who spoke often of better days, days when our name meant something, when invitations arrived without begging, when creditors didn't knock with forced politeness and tight smiles. But those days lived only in stories now, retold so often they had begun to sound like fiction. Our house reflected that quiet decline perfectly, once respectable, now merely standing. Cracks spidered along the walls, hidden behind carefully placed furniture. The carpets were threadbare in the places we walked most, and the parlor smelled faintly of dust and old paper. My mother called it rustic charm. I called it survival dressed up as dignity. Our days followed an unchanging rhythm. Breakfasts were quiet affairs, my mother's hands always busy, folding napkins that didn't need folding. My father buried behind his paper, pretending not to see the tension that hovered like fog. Afternoons were devoted to needlepoint, reading, and the careful art of not wanting too much. I learned early how dangerous desire could be. I was the invisible girl in every room I entered, not plain, never that, but unremarkable in the way that matters most in society. I lacked the loud beauty that turned heads, or the flirtatious charm that sparked gossip. At balls, I stayed near the walls, observing rather than participating. While other girls practiced smiles in the mirror, I practiced disappearing, and I was content with that. Or at least, I told myself I was. My future had always been presented to me as inevitable. A sensible marriage to a local squire or minor gentleman, someone kind, dull, and safe. Children, a modest household, a life that would never surprise me. It wasn't exciting, but it was survivable, and for a girl like me, that felt like enough. At least, until the day my father asked me to sit down. I knew something was wrong. The moment I saw his face, hope and fear battled there, locked in an uneasy truce. My mother stood behind him, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Loretta," my father began, his voice too careful, "there's something you must understand." That was when the world shifted beneath my feet. The truth spilled out in fragments at first. Debts, overdue payments, obligations, long ignored and finally unforgiving. The polite silence of our creditors had ended. The house, the land, everything we had left, it was all slipping away. And then came the solution. A marriage, not just any marriage. My marriage, to a man I had never met. "The Duke of Colchester," my father said, as if the title alone might soften the blow. I remember the way the words sounded. Too grand, too heavy. Like they didn't belong anywhere near my life. A duke didn't marry girls like me. Dukes married heiresses, women with fortunes and connections, women who glittered. But this wasn't about romance or compatibility. It was a transaction, a business merger, dressed up in silk and vows. They spoke of him in reverent tones. He was everything society admired. Handsome, honorable, wealthy beyond imagination. A man with impeccable manners and an impeccable reputation. Perfect, they said. That word followed him like a shadow. And orchestrating this miracle, this rescue, was his sister, Lady Charlotte Sterlington. Her name alone carried a strange weight. Notorious, clever, unconventional. A woman whispered about at teas and dinner parties. It was she who had taken an interest in my father's predicament. She who had suggested, ever so delicately, that I might suit her brother. "She's taken quite a liking to you," my mother said, her eyes shining with hope. "She believes you'd be suitable." Suitable. As if I were a piece of furniture she'd examined and approved. Lady Charlotte had extended an invitation to their country estate, an opportunity, they called it. a chance for me to become acquainted with my future. To charm, to secure not just my own fate, but my family's survival. Me parents were ecstatic. To them, this was nothing short of divine intervention, a benevolent hand reaching down to pull us from ruin. To me, it felt like a sentence being passed. That night, as I packed my small trunk, my hands trembled. Each folded dress felt like another piece of myself being sealed away. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, at the girl who had always lived quietly, safely, and wondered who I was expected to become. A duchess, a wife, a solution. I wasn't being courted, I was being offered. And somewhere out there was a woman, a stranger, who had designed this entire path for me. The Duke's sister, the architect of my future, the woman everyone praised as brilliant and forward-thinking. I already resented her. As the carriage pulled away from our fading home the next morning, dread curled deep in my stomach. I was leaving behind the only life I had ever known, heading toward a gilded cage built from good intentions and social necessity. I told myself to be grateful. I told myself this was an honor. But all I could think was this: I was being sent to marry a perfect man, and I had never felt more completely powerless. The carriage ride to the Stirlington estate felt less like a social visit, and more like a procession toward judgment. With every mile, the world I knew seemed to peel away. The roads grew smoother, wider, carefully maintained in a way that spoke of wealth so vast it no longer needed to announce itself. Even the air felt different, cleaner somehow, as if poverty itself dared not linger here. I sat stiffly against the velvet seat, gloved hands clasped in my lap, watching the countryside blur past the window. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, calm on the surface, but hollow-eyed beneath. I looked like a girl being delivered. When the Stirlington estate finally came into view, my breath caught. It wasn't merely large, it was commanding. The manor rose from the land like it had grown there naturally, stone upon stone layered with centuries of quiet authority. Tall windows gleamed in the pale afternoon light, and ivy climbed the walls with possessive familiarity. This was not a house meant to welcome. It was meant to intimidate. I stepped down from the carriage, suddenly acutely aware of how small I was. Inside, the air was cool and hushed. A stone-faced butler took my name and led me through corridors lined with portraits. Men and women who looked out at me with expressions of certainty, of belonging. Their eyes seemed to follow me, as if measuring whether I deserved to walk among them. I was shown into the grand hall and left alone. The silence pressed in around me. I stood there, clutching my purse like a lifeline, my heart thudding loudly in my ears. This was it. Any moment now, the Duke would arrive. He would look at me, assess me, and decide whether I was acceptable. Footsteps echoed. I straightened instinctively, smoothing my dress, bracing myself for polite scrutiny. But the figure that rounded the corner was not a man. She moved with unself-conscious ease, her stride long and confident. She wore fitted riding breeches instead of a gown, a tailored coat thrown casually over one shoulder. There was a faint smudge of dirt on her cheek, like she'd forgotten herself in the outdoors. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes, green and sharp and far too observant, lit with amusement. "You must be Miss Linfield." Her voice was low, warm, threaded with humor. "I do apologize for my brother's absence," she continued, entirely unapologetic. "He's inspecting his prize, winning roses. A thrilling endeavor, I assure you." For a moment, I simply stared. This was Lady Charlotte Stirlington, the mastermind, the schemer, the woman who had rearranged my life with a few clever words and a well-placed invitation. She was nothing like the image I had constructed in my mind. I had imagined silk and lace, rigid posture, a calculating smile honed in drawing rooms. Instead, this woman looked like she had just stepped out of freedom itself. She radiated a kind of vitality that made the air around her feel charged. "Lady Charlotte," I managed, dipping into a clumsy curtsy. She laughed softly, not unkindly. "Please, don't look so terrified. I promise, I only bite when bored." Her gaze flicked over me, not in the way society women evaluated one another, nor the way men appraised women, but with genuine curiosity, as if she were trying to see past the careful exterior I had learned to present. "I suppose introductions are in order," she said. "I'm the villain of this story, the meddling sister, the architect of your discomfort. I blinked, startled. You don't deny it, I asked before I could stop myself. Her smile widened, slow and dazzling. Why would I? It's far more interesting to own one's sins. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell leather and something faintly wild, like wind and green things. My pulse betrayed me, quickening for reasons I did not yet understand. Tell me honestly, Miss Linfield, she said, tilting her head. Are you terrified or just bored? The question struck me with such blunt force that the truth slipped out before politeness could intervene. A bit of both, I admitted. Her eyes lit with unmistakable delight. Honesty, how refreshing. She gestured toward the windows. Walk with me. The house has a way of swallowing guests whole. We moved side by side through the corridors. My steps cautious, hers easy. She filled the space with her presence without trying to. I found myself oddly aware of every small thing. The brush of her sleeve, the sound of her breath, the way she listened when I spoke. My brother is a good man, she said after a moment. Kind, stable, dutiful to a fault. She paused. Perfect. The word again. He will give you security, she continued. Comfort, respect. She glanced at me then. Really looked at me. But tell me, Loretta, may I call you that? The sound of my name in her mouth sent a strange jolt through me. Yes, I said softly. Do you want a life that is merely comfortable? I didn't know how to answer. Before I could, she added casually. I read your poetry. The world seemed to tilt. My poetry, I whispered. She nodded. The little book you published anonymously, the one filled with longing and fury and aching restraint. Her smile softened. I knew whoever wrote, it could not be dull. No one had ever spoken of my writing like that. No one had ever seen it for what it truly was. I stopped walking. She turned, concern flickering across her face. Have I overstepped? No, I said quickly. It's just that no one has ever noticed that part of me before. Her expression grew thoughtful. That is a tragedy, she said quietly. For a heartbeat, we simply stood there, two women in a grand hallway, the air between us humming with something unspoken. I felt exposed in a way that was terrifying and exhilarating. She smiled. Then, softer, slower. Come, let's not keep my brother waiting too long. He already believes this visit is about roses and propriety. As we resumed walking, I realized something unsettling. The sparks everyone expected to ignite between me and the Duke had already caught fire, but they were burning in the entirely wrong direction. I did eventually meet the Duke. There was no dramatic entrance, no thunderclap moment, where the world shifted the way it had when I first saw his sister. He arrived precisely on time for tea, dressed immaculately, posture flawless, expression pleasant in a way that felt carefully practiced. The Duke of Colchester was exactly as everyone had promised. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked as though it had been designed to inspire confidence rather than curiosity. His smile was polite, his gaze steady, his manners beyond reproach. When he bowed, it was with just the right amount of respect, neither patronizing nor intimate. Miss Linfield, he said warmly. We are very pleased to have you here. Pleased, not intrigued, not captivated. Pleased. We sat across from one another. As servants poured tea, he asked about my journey, my family, my health. I answered dutifully. He nodded in all the right places. The conversation flowed smoothly and left absolutely no mark behind. It was like speaking to a beautifully framed painting. Behind him, leaning casually against the mantel, Lady Charlotte watched us with open amusement. She began at once. The matchmaker in her was relentless, methodical, and, ironically, far too enthusiastic. Every hour of the day was quietly orchestrated. Walks in the gardens, private viewings of the estate's art collection, music after dinner. My brother so enjoys a sonata in the evenings. Loretta, she'd say lightly. And you play beautifully, I'm told. She made it sound accidental. It never was. The first walk was through the rose garden. The Duke spoke with genuine passion about cultivation, about the precise balance of sun and shade required to produce perfection. He gestured with his gloves, explaining pruning techniques with earnest intensity. They are fragile creatures, he said. Demanding, but worth the effort. Charlotte drifted to my side as if by coincidence. "He could speak of these thorny beasts for an hour," she murmured under her breath, her shoulder brushing mine. "I once timed him." I bit back a smile. "Tell me," she whispered, "what do you think of this place?" The question startled me. No one had asked my opinion since arriving. I hesitated, then answered honestly. "It's beautiful," I said, "but overwhelming. Like being swallowed by someone else's expectations." She studied my face, eyes intent, and nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly it." On the lake, the Duke arranged a boat ride. Convinced it would be romantic, he pointed out birds with scholarly delight, naming them as if reciting poetry of his own. Charlotte sat across from me, trailing her fingers in the water, watching my reflection ripple and distort. She flicked droplets toward me with a mischievous smile. I splashed her back before I could stop myself. Her laughter rang out, free and unrestrained, and for a moment, the Duke looked faintly confused, as though the scene hadn't unfolded according to his expectations. From then on, a quiet understanding formed between Charlotte and me. We exchanged glances when her brother spoke too long, suppressed smiles during formal dinners, shared eye rolls behind gloved hands. It was a private language, invisible to everyone else, and it bound us closer with every passing day. Charlotte found excuses to be near me constantly. She asked my opinion on books, then insisted I read passages aloud, not for her brother, but for her. She would close her eyes as she listened, as though committing my voice to memory. Again, she'd say softly, "That line, read it again." In the evenings, she would walk beside me through the dim corridors, our footsteps echoing together. "Do you know what frightens me?" she confessed one night. "That my brother's life will be safe and tidy and completely devoid of fire." Her gaze lingered on me in a way that made my breath catch. I began to dread the Duke's presence, not because he was unkind, but because his courtship felt like a slow erasure. Every polite gesture reminded me of the life waiting to close around me. Charlotte, meanwhile, made me feel seen. It was her laughter that drew me, her intelligence that challenged me, the way she listened, not to respond, but to understand. And the more she pushed her brother and me together, the more my heart betrayed me. Her plan unraveled quietly, dangerously. There were moments, lingering touches when she guided me through a doorway, conversations held just a second too long, silences that felt heavy with things we dared not name. I tried to remind myself of reality, of duty, of consequence. But desire has a way of ignoring logic. The Duke might have been the destination everyone had chosen for me. But Charlotte had become the journey I could no longer resist. The night of the ball arrived like a verdict. From the moment I woke, the house buzzed with anticipation. Servants moved with sharpened purpose. Doors opened and closed in hurried whispers. Every mirror I passed seemed to reflect not a woman preparing for an evening of celebration, but one walking toward a moment she could no longer delay. Charlotte had arranged everything. She appeared in my doorway that afternoon carrying a gown draped carefully over her arms. When she unfolded it, the fabric caught the light, like spilled ink turned to sapphire. "For tonight," she said softly. I reached out, almost afraid to touch it. The dress was exquisite, far beyond anything I had ever owned. "It's too much," I whispered. She shook her head. "It's exactly enough." As the maid helped dress me, Charlotte stayed, watching in the mirror's reflection. Our eyes met again and again. Each time, something tightened in my chest. "It suits you," she said quietly when it was done. "It matches the fire in your writing." That single sentence nearly undid me. When I entered the ballroom, sound and light crashed over me all at once. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead. Silk and jewels shimmered. Laughter rang too loud, too bright. The air was thick with expectation, and I could feel it pressing against my skin. Everyone knew why I was there. The Duke approached me promptly, offering his arm. His smile was kind, steady, unaware of the storm raging inside me. We danced. My feet moved through the steps as if guided by memory rather than will. His hand rested properly at my waist, never lingering, never daring. He spoke of the season, of guests, of how pleased he was that I had come. I answered when expected, but my eyes betrayed me. They kept finding Charlotte. She stood at the edge of the floor, watching, not with triumph, not with pride, but with something unreadable, something almost pained. The music swelled. Applause followed as the dance ended, and I knew, if I stayed, if I allowed the night to continue, I would lose myself entirely. "I need air," I murmured, offering the Duke a careful smile before he could protest. I fled. The corridors were dim and blessedly empty. My breath came fast, the walls seeming to close in as panic finally claimed me. I pushed open a door at random and stepped onto a stone balcony. The night air hit me like freedom. Stars stretched endlessly overhead. The music from inside drifted out faintly, distorted and distant, like a memory I was already trying to escape. I gripped the cold stone railing, willing my heartbeat to slow. "I had a feeling I'd find you here." Her voice. I turned. Charlotte stood in the doorway, a shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Her expression was stripped of mischief, of cleverness. What remained was concern, raw and unguarded. "Is my brother so terrible?" she asked gently. The question shattered the last of my restraint. "No," I whispered, then louder, broken. "He's perfect." She took a step closer. "He's everything a woman is supposed to want," I continued, tears blurring the stars above. "Kind, respectable, safe. But not what you want," she said softly. I shook my head, a sob escaping me. "I can't marry him, Charlotte. I can't." She reached for my hands, steadying me. "Loretta, I know I put you in an impossible position. But you would make a remarkable duchess. You would be admired, protected." "That's not it," I cried. "That's not the reason." Her brows knit together. "Then tell me." I drew a shaking breath. The truth burned in my chest, demanding release. "Your plan had a fatal flaw." She stilled. "What flaw?" I met her eyes, those impossible green eyes that had haunted me since the moment I arrived. "The flaw is you." The silence that followed was absolute. "I wasn't supposed to meet you," I went on, voice trembling. "I wasn't supposed to talk to you. I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you." The words hung between us, fragile and irreversible. For a long moment, Charlotte said nothing. Her face revealed nothing. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure she could hear it. Then, she smiled. Not her usual teasing grin. This was slower, deeper, almost reverent. She closed the distance between us in 2 steps and cupped my face gently, her thumb brushing away a tear. "Loretta," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "That was never a flaw." Her forehead rested against mine. I could feel her breath, warm and unsteady. It was the entire point. My breath caught. "What?" She exhaled a quiet laugh. "I didn't bring you here for my brother. I brought you here because I recognized you. Because I wanted to know the woman behind those words. I just never expected," she faltered. "I never expected to want you this much." The confession unraveled the last barrier between us. My hands rose to grip her coat, as if afraid she might vanish. She leaned closer, so close that one more inch would have changed everything. "Tell me to stop," she whispered. I didn't. The kiss, when it came, was soft at first, hesitant, almost questioning. Then it deepened, all the restraint of the past weeks finally breaking free. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was deliberate, certain. When we finally parted, our foreheads still touching, the future loomed, terrifying and brilliant. Inside, the orchestra played on. Outside, everything had changed. The world did not end the night. Charlotte kissed me. It felt like it might, but morning came all the same. Sunlight crept into my chamber in thin golden strands, illuminating the remnants of the night before. The sapphire gown draped over a chair, my gloves abandoned on the vanity, my heart still racing in my chest. For a long moment, I lay there listening to the estate wake around me, half convinced that everything had been a dream born of panic and longing. But when I rose and opened my door, Charlotte stood in the corridor. She looked as though she hadn't slept at all. Her hair was loose, her expression serious in a way I had never seen before. Gone was the playful schemer. In her place stood a woman who had made a decision and intended to stand by it. "Come," she said quietly. "We should speak to my brother." We found the Duke in the breakfast room, alone, staring out at the gardens he so lovingly tended. He turned as we entered, surprise flickering across his face when he saw us together, our shoulders nearly touching, our resolve unmistakable. Charlotte did not waste time. "We need to be honest with you," she said. I watched his face change as the truth unfolded, confusion, realization, and then, something I hadn't expected, relief. When Charlotte finished, silence filled the room. The Duke exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "Well," he said at last, with a faint, wry smile, "that explains quite a lot." He turned to me then. "Miss Linfield, Loretta, please understand, I never wished for a marriage built on obligation alone. I agreed because it seemed expected of me, because it was safe." Charlotte snorted softly. He shot her a look, then smiled again. "I have spent my life being perfect," he continued. "It is exhausting." He surprised us both by laughing quietly. "If anyone deserves happiness, Charlotte," he said, "it is you. And Loretta, if my sister has found someone who sees her as she truly is, then I will not stand in the way." My breath hitched. You mean it." "I do," he said simply. "You have my blessing." Facing my family was harder. The truth arrived like a thunderclap in our modest parlor. My mother wept, not from cruelty but from fear. My father's face crumpled under the weight of what he believed he had lost. But the Duke kept his word. Without fanfare, without demanding anything in return, he settled my father's debts. The relief was immediate and profound. For the first time in years, my parents slept without fear knocking at their door. Freedom, it turned out, was the most generous gift of all. Society was far less forgiving. Whispers followed us like shadows. Invitations vanished. Names were spoken with raised brows and careful smiles. A Duke's sister, choosing a woman over convention, was a scandal too delicious to ignore. Charlotte only laughed. "Let them talk," she said one evening as we packed. "They always do." We left the countryside quietly. No grand farewell, no dramatic declarations. Just two women stepping into a future unclaimed by anyone else. We chose a town where no one knew our names, where titles meant little and anonymity was a gift. Our house was small, sunlit, alive, for the first time. I wrote without fear. I published under my own name. Charlotte found ways to channel her brilliance into causes she believed in. Quiet rebellions that mattered far more than balls and alliances. We built a life piece by piece, not perfect, but honest, sometimes. Late at night, I would catch her watching me with that same assessing curiosity she'd had the first day we met. "What?" I'd ask. She'd smile. "I still can't believe my plan worked." I'd laugh, leaning into her. "It didn't." She'd kiss my temple. "No." She'd agree. It became something better. I had been sent to marry a duke. Instead, I found myself, and in doing so, I found her.